Alright, motherfucks. We might get 2 videos today because I already I already recorded one of them yesterday. I recorded quite a few videos yesterday. But I figured I should make this one regardless, motherfucks. Because Bobby Lashley, that's right, bitch boys. Bobby Lashley did it. Bobby Lashley is the WWE champ. And there was no way I could let this go without making a video on it. I figured either I make it now and just insert it in my lineup, or I make it Thursday when it's too late, motherfucks. So here we are, or whatever, Friday. I don't even know how many videos I made. Point is this, motherfucks. Point is this, alright? Bobby Lashley is obviously the best wrestler in WWE right now, in terms of, like, having the total package. Now, the one thing he doesn't have, exactly, is, like, charisma and mic skills, right? I mean, he's not... Yeah, no, he's pretty atrocious, let's be real. He's pretty atrocious. Every time Bobby Lashley speaks on the mic, it's not a good moment, you know what I mean? Like Brock Lesnar, kind of the same thing. Not exactly the same thing, but kind of the same thing. You know, which brings me to the real point. We got to talk about the real MVP of this campaign to the World Championship. The real MVP is MVP, motherfucks. MVP. Think about it. Lashley's what, 44, maybe 45? He's not a spring chicken, motherfucks. You know? So what they did to him today, I mean yesterday, last night, making him WWE champion, could easily have been done several years ago when he came back to WWE. But they didn't. Why? Because Lashley needed something, you know what I mean? He needed something to make him stand out. That's pretty much it. He has to stand out. You know, he already stands out in the ring because he's a great wrestler and he's a big guy and he's strong and he does power moves, right? But when talking on the mic becomes something very, very important as you're a champion, right? Because you can be like a guy that wrestles Sami Zayn, and Sami Zayn can do all the talking, you know what I mean? But when you're champion, you gotta talk, right? So that's why a lot of these people don't become champion, because they can't really talk. So here we are, motherfuckers. What do? They take Lashley and they put him with Lio Rush, which I actually thought worked pretty well. You know what I mean? Lio Rush was a good little manager for Lashley. And he was also a wrestler, so there were things you could do with Lio Rush. Problem is, Lio Rush apparently was a little shit in real life, so he got fired. Right? I hear it's because he had a lot of quote-unquote heat in the back, right? Nonetheless, this kind of derailed Lashley's push. Then in order to save some time, because they didn't know what to do with Lashley, they decided to put him in a situation where he will be teamed up with Lana and will be facing Rusev, right? In a cuck gimmick type of shit, right? He's cucking Rusev, motherfucks. Matter of fact, he cucked him so bad, Rusev had to go to AEW so he could feel like a bigger man. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, there you have it, right? That kind of was like a waste of time, you know? I mean, I thought it was like not the worst thing ever, but it was a waste of time, the whole Lana and Bobby Lashley marriage, right? Eventually, that shit hit the fan and MVP came along. And it took some time. But it had to take some time. Because you can't take the guy that was like, you know, involved in a love triangle and just put him in a suit and be like, remember the Beatdown Clan or whatever the fuck it was called? I think it was the Beatdown Clan. I always confuse the Beatdown Clan with the one with the 3 guys with the white masks. But whatever, it is what it is. Point is, MVP completely changed this guy's career. And now MVP and the Hurt Business have the tag titles and, motherfucks, the WWE Championship. Now, I believe that this entitles MVP to become the United States Champion. That's just my opinion personally, right? And the Hurt Business really, really has been a great faction and a great thing on Raw. Primarily because of the things that they do, but also because of the way that it was built up. First of all, it started just with MVP. Like, it started arguably, like, almost last year after WrestleMania, when MVP came out, or maybe after the Royal Rumble, I don't remember. But there was a point when MVP came out and he had Dolph Ziggler in, like, the MVP lounge, whatever the fuck it's called, right? And he was like, Drew McIntyre, not Dolph Ziggler, motherfucks. And he was like, Drew, listen to me. You know, you're going to need someone to manage you, bro. Like, you need me, you know? And Drew McIntyre, because he's like such a great face, decides that this is enough to justify kicking someone in the face. Someone says you need me, so he does a claymore on his ass. Boom, that's it, right? This starts the wheels turning, right? MVP's new role in the company was evidently going to be what it is now, you know? He wasn't going to be this guy that starts wrestling. He was going to be the head of a stable. He was going to be like the mouthpiece of a stable. So that's what he does. You know what I mean? Then he gets Lashley eventually after wrestling him away from Lana. And then Shelton. You know? Then they go after Apollo Crews and eventually pick up Cedric Alexander. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing about this, motherfuckers. Lashley as a heel is pretty good because he's a big, strong guy, and him being like a bully and doing things like stepping on people's toes and pushing people around and just destroying people like Miz in the ring is all fine and dandy. But I personally believe that Lashley is one of the people that could be one of the greatest baby faces of all time. I'm talking about he could have like a John Cena career, you know? So I would actually prefer that sooner rather than later they have Bobby Lashley break up with Hurt Business and he becomes a face and he starts destroying all of them. I mean, it wouldn't be much of a feud because, let's be real, he would destroy all of them in 10 seconds. But still, you know, I believe that Lashley's wrestling style is more conducive to being a face. So like someone like Randy Orton, his wrestling style is more conducive to being a heel. What I mean by that is this. If you're Randy Orton, you're kind of boring in the ring, let's be honest. You know what I'm saying? Randy Orton is definitely capable of having good matches. You know, he had the greatest wrestling match of all time or whatever with Edge. He's definitely capable of doing it. Problem is, he doesn't really do it, you know? Typically because he's usually a face. So his matches are always slow-paced, and he's out there like doing headlocks and things like that. And that's boring, right? Nobody wants to see that. But if a heel does it, it's okay. Because if a heel is a little boring, that's fine. Because then you start cheering for the other guy, right? Lashley, on the other hand, there's nothing boring about this guy, all right? Lashley, once in a while, will do a rest hold here and there. But even a rest hold looks awesome because Lashley's so strong, right? His finisher is great. You know what I mean? The Hurt Lock, I like it a lot now. The spear, he has one of the best spears. That one-handed spine buster, which I personally believe should be his finisher. That move looks fucking awesome, right? Lashley is just an awesome guy, you know? His moves are the kind of moves that you want to see. You know, not like dumb shit like Sami Zayn or Haluva kick. Nobody wants to see that shit, right? Lashley's moves people actually want to see. So that's why I believe Lashley should be a face. However, I will say this. The way that he beat The Miz was good, right? It was the way a face would win. In the sense of like he didn't cheat, he didn't do anything. Like Lashley's build up to being a champion, including his United States title run, all of that, right, has been booked pretty well, right? Even though he's a heel, he hasn't been booked to be this cheating heel or anything like that. He's been booked to be a dominant motherfucker because that's what he is, right? The fact that you had this guy like chasing around Sami Zayn is preposterous, you know? Especially when within the same character, you could easily extract from him the attitude that he had against The Miz, right? Where he grabbed The Miz and beeled through him across the ring. It was fucking awesome, right? Now here's the thing, motherfucks. I want to point one thing out that I think is extremely important and is being lost in the shuffle somewhere, right? There is potential for great storytelling here, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about just the general point, right? The point I'm trying to make is the importance of the mid-card title, to me, because of Lashley, feels like it's been brought back to some form of glory. So typically the way wrestling works, even if you play like WWF Attitude, back in the day on PS1, right? You had these little ladders, right? It was presented as a season, but you had these ladders. You know, you had to fight like 15 people to become the European champion, and then you get put on the path of the Intercontinental champion, right? I think you might also get put in the path of the tag team champion, and then eventually it culminates with you being put on the path on the 15 or 20 person ladder of the world title, right? The implications here are that it is a tiered system, right? Obviously, we all know this. Like, we all know, for example, that the 24/7 title is essentially the hardcore title, meaning that it has the same prestige as the hardcore title, which was, for some reason, comparable to the European title. But the European title was better, I thought, right? And then you had the Intercontinental title, which now you have the same, and the US title, which are equal. Then you have the world title. It's as simple as that, right? However, the implication is that if someone is a long time Intercontinental champion, right, that they are ready now to go to the main event. You know what I'm saying? They are ready to get that push. You know, I did all I could here, right? Same thing with NXT. Now, like, the NXT title serves as that thing, right? Where it's like, I've been NXT champion for my entire life, and now I'm going to move on to the main roster. And they should become the number one contender, you know, or should be like one of the ones that is treated as the number one contender. Just because this person has been undefeated or nearly undefeated in NXT. Now, I'm not saying this person should then main event WrestleMania, but it should mean something, right? And for a long time, it hasn't meant something, or hasn't meant anything. Like, the last mid-card champion that actually benefited from being a mid-card champion, I really personally believe it's Randy Orton, motherfucks. Randy Orton from back in the day, from the days of Evolution, right? Like, that was the end. The end of the mid-card title was Randy Orton's reign. That's what it was. During that time, the type of person that would be Intercontinental Champion would be like Rob Van Dam, Orton, Shelton Benjamin, you know what I mean? Some of these guys, right? And a lot of these guys you would expect to achieve great things. Meanwhile, or arguably John Cena, you could say, right? John Cena's first US title run, which was pretty much around the same time, right? Same shit, you know? You had John Cena, you had Booker T. It really felt like these guys either were going to achieve something, or in the case of Booker T, that he was like hopefully getting back to the main event picture because he's Booker T, right? Exactly, cucks. That's what I'm getting at here. You know what I mean? Also, it's kind of weird that they try to make Booker T US champion when he just gave his US championship to Chris Kanyon during the invasion angle. You know, that's a little he cared about it. But the point is, the mid-card title used to mean something, right? It was a precursor, right? When someone becomes mid-card champion, it was considered a huge deal because the implications were that more likely than not, this person would then have a stab at the main event. Now, this doesn't mean that they would become a main eventer, right? Because there's plenty of people that didn't win the world title, like Val Venus or Goldust, that became mid-card champion. But it was a good stepping stone. And here's how you know. A lot of people in the Attitude Era never became mid-card champion, right? There was a clear, delineated mid-card, right? And there were people like, let's say, William Regal, who flirted with the mid-card. William Regal was an undercard wrestler who would occasionally become Intercontinental Champion or have that kind of mid-card level feud, right? He wasn't a jobber by any means, right? You know, but he wasn't a mid-carder either, right? Mid-carders at that point were people like Benoit, Kurt Angle, Jericho, to a certain extent Eddie Guerrero, you know what I mean? It was a very strong mid-card, right? And before those guys came in, the mid-card was like, I don't know, Jeff Jarrett, Owen Hart, you know what I mean? These kind of guys, right? Like people that were accepted as being great wrestlers, you know? China, eventually, right? You know, that kind of shit. But you didn't see people like Hardcore Holly or Steve Blackman become Intercontinental Champion, you know? They were clearly one rung below that. Crash Holly, one rung below. The Hardy Boys, one rung below. Edge and Christian, at that time, one rung below. They were, like, it would not be inconceivable for Christian or Edge to become the European champion, right? But it would be inconceivable for them to become the Intercontinental Champion because they were not on the same level as the people like Val Venus, right? As that kind of guy. You know what I mean? Val Venus was presented as a mid-carder. And Val Venus, and people like Val Venus, were presented as mid-carders that could become main eventers, right? Like I said in a previous video, or maybe in a future video, depending on when I said it, motherfucks, because I haven't uploaded all of them, right? Val Venus would have a feud with The Rock at a pay-per-view, you know, and this was considered like normal. It was like, oh shit, it's a feud with The Rock, whatever. Val Venus is cool, you know. There's people that are like that, and that was very important, you know. Then eventually, during the brand split, that's when everything went to shit, because now you have 2 mid-card titles, right, and half the roster. So you're like, fuck it, why don't we give it to Kenzo Suzuki, let's say, right? They didn't, but you know what I mean, right? And that's what happened, right? Shelton Benjamin was a great wrestler back then. He had a lot of potential. But I believe that Shelton Benjamin is the beginning of the end for the prestige of the Intercontinental title. After him, it didn't mean as much. You know, he had this long reign, like one of the longest reigns ever. He had like an 8-9 month reign, right? You know, Randy Orton had a long reign. RVD had a memorable reign. Edge was in there somewhere getting his reign, right? But Shelton Benjamin and people like Carlito and people like that had really long reigns, right? Cena and Orton were the last 2 guys to use the mid-card title to catapult themselves eventually to the main event. Yeah, it wouldn't have worked if they weren't mid-card champion for so long. Because back then, I remember being like, holy shit, Randy Orton won the IC title. Like, people like Jericho were feuding for it. Christian, Booker T, you know, these are people that are like, that were obviously gonna get a rub eventually, you know? But Orton won it. It was a big deal, motherfucks. So there you have it, right? Now, I'm not saying, of course, that Lashley will single-handedly bring prestige and this kind of honor to the mid-card belt because he held it for so long and then immediately became WWE champion. Of course not. You would have to do this several more times in a row in order to bring back that prestige, to bring back that idea, right? It's the same thing with things like the Royal Rumble or the Money in the Bank. If you have the Money in the Bank for 3 years, and 3 years people cash in and fail, then people don't give a shit anymore. They're like, oh, okay, they're going to cash in and fail again, right? So you have to have continuous prestige for these things. And that's kind of the problem. You know what I mean? For the longest time, after Shelton Benjamin became champion, right, then eventually it started going to people like Kofi Kingston. You know, at least Shelton Benjamin, you can look at, even now, but definitely in his prime, and you're going to be like, this guy could easily be world champion. You know what I mean? Like in terms of his physique, he looks like a heavyweight, you know? And Shelton Benjamin, at the time when he was fighting for the IC title, right, he was like out there beating Triple H. You know, like, I mean, in like, I don't want to say a sneaky fashion, but in like a fluke fashion, but nonetheless, beating Triple H almost twice, or maybe twice, right? He was getting a push. It's just that his push didn't work. You know, eventually they're like, fuck it, we're going to put blonde hair on you, and now you're the gold standard, you know? So that's the problem, right? The problem is, for some reason, they stopped doing this. They stopped doing this, and they introduced other things, like the Money in the Bank. So, for example, someone like Edge, right? Edge got his rub from the Money in the Bank. But the 8-9 months between WrestleMania and Elimination Chamber of the following year, Edge had one of the best years anyone can have in WWE history, you know? I mean, first of all, he had the memorable Matt Hardy feud, but more important than that, he had all these feuds like with Kane and with other big stars where he either came out on top or did really well. He got the association with Lita, which was a big deal. You know, he became a main eventer on his own. And then the Money in the Bank was just used as a tool to give him the title, right? The implications then became, if you win the Money in the Bank, you're going to get a push. Not you're going to get buried and then win the title. You know? And that's the same implication that we had for the mid-card belts. The mid-card belts meant that you were going to have a nice run, or you'd play, you know, hot cake with someone else, hot potato, I should say, with someone else, and one of you would eventually get the rub of being the mid-card champion. You know, maybe at WrestleMania or something, right? But eventually, what happened was that the number of people that had the mid-card title and achieved nothing became too high. All these records were now being broken left and right. You know, like The Miz is like one of the most successful IC champions ever, you know? And The Miz has been around for a while now, but the IC title is a very old title. CM Punk would go back from being like World Heavyweight Champion to IC Champion in a few months. You know, it started to mean nothing. It was a piece of shit title, you know? It meant zero. Like when people like Kofi Kingston are battling Cody Rhodes for it, like who gives a fuck, you know? None of these guys are going to be champion in WWE, or so we thought, and here we are with Kofi Kingston as champion. But it didn't feel right. So now that Bobby Lashley, a legitimate wrestler, held the U.S. title, you know what I mean? Matt Riddle, his argument, by the way, Matt Riddle last night in the match, he was like laughing and smiling when Bobby Lashley was about to win. I never understood that. Shouldn't he hate Bobby Lashley? Nonetheless, right? Matt Riddle now has a legitimate claim. You can be like, well, wait a second, bro. I beat Bobby Lashley for the United States title, which I still hold, right? Shouldn't I get a title shot? You know, I whooped his ass. Now, he didn't whoop his ass, but I whooped his ass. Like, he survived. He wasn't afraid of Lashley, right? I mean, Lashley of now versus Lashley of 3 weeks ago is a different character that presented differently. But nonetheless, that's what I'm saying. Same logic, right? Let's say some other wrestler, I don't know, let's say Andrade, right? Andrade comes back, and he's like, I want the U.S. title. And he enters this long, multi-month feud, let's say, with Matt Riddle, and he eventually beats him. You know? Then Andrade can be like, well, hold on a second, fam. I beat the guy that beat the champion a few months ago. You know, the champion hasn't lost since then. So I think I'm the only one that has like any value here because I'm also the United States champion. That's exactly my point. That's how wrestling should work, right? The guy in the lower division needs to build himself up like Ultimate Warrior did, right? And then go and challenge Hulk Hogan. You know what I'm saying? Challenge John Cena. Challenge the people that are at the top. But you have to have a place to start. Nowadays, because the belts mean absolutely nothing, right? Because nobody really wants to be Intercontinental Champion. Nobody wants to be U.S. Champion. Nobody really wants to go to NXT. The stars that have any kind of, like, booking power, if you will, just surpass that, right? Look at Drew McIntyre, you know? Drew McIntyre, he had to do his little stint in NXT, right? Just so people can be reintroduced to him. And then afterwards, he goes to the main roster and goes for the title. He doesn't waste time trying to be United States Champion. No, motherfuckers, nobody cares about that. Or Intercontinental Champion, right? Same shit. People just surpass these things, right? Like, has Roman Reigns ever been U.S. or Intercontinental Champion? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Has Randy Orton had either of these titles for the last 15 years? No, because they don't give a shit. You know what I mean? Braun Strowman, same thing. He's like he's clearly going to be a guy that's fighting for the world title. This makes no sense to have him go and get the IC title. You know? That's what I'm getting at, motherfuckers. For a long time, though, the IC title was considered to be extremely prestigious. And people would want it. You know, now, of course, Stone Cold and The Rock and Triple H didn't want it. Or Undertaker didn't want it. But people wanted it. It was people's dreams to become the IC champion. You know? And once in a while, we are reminded of this mid-card dream. Right? The mid-card dream is brought up once in a while when it's convenient. You know what I mean? Like a few WrestleManias ago, when they had that Intercontinental title ladder match, and Zack Ryder wins it, right? And Zack Ryder was like, oh my God, this is one of the greatest moments of my life. I just won the Intercontinental title at WrestleMania. You know? And for a second, it made me think, like, holy shit, that's such a huge accomplishment. You know? Like, some of my favorite wrestlers have been Intercontinental Champion. And some of them have been Intercontinental Champion at WrestleMania. You know? And he just did it. He won it at WrestleMania. In front of thousands of people. You know? That's how the mid-card title should be booked. And I believe that Bobby Lashley's transition from U.S. Champion directly into WWE Champion, right, will help this cause. They can do better. They can just say something like, for example, like on Raw, that makes it seem as if these are two divisions, which is how they're presented anyways, right? It basically like point out that the guy who was U.S. Champion for so long, right, he was out there having competitive matches, right? Like Riddle would beat him occasionally, you know? And ultimately Riddle did beat him for the title, right? So the argument then is, if Riddle can almost beat and then eventually beat Bobby Lashley for the U.S. title, what the hell's The Miz doing as champion, right? Riddle should be able to kick his ass. Same shit, motherfuckers. Now, I understand this is frustrated by the fact that The Miz is a Money in the Bank winner, and therefore he's not really the clear representation of the world champion. But nonetheless, motherfuckers, nonetheless, it's a step in the right direction. Now, the follow-through. This is almost as important. The follow-through. If WWE is smart, they will realize they have something entertaining on their hands here. I firmly believe that Bobby Lashley can bring back viewers. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to bring back a lot of viewers. You know, at the end of the day, he's like a 20-minute segment in a 3-hour show. But Bobby Lashley is obviously a better champion than Drew McIntyre. You know, furthermore, Drew McIntyre has gotten stale. Like his promo delivery skills, right? He's like, well, it's like he talks to the audience, but pretends he's talking to his opponent, you know? So he'll be like, hey everyone, I'm Drew McIntyre, and like Sheamus betrayed me, right? I don't know how you could do this. Then you look at the camera, and he'll be like, Sheamus, we've been best friends for years now, right? And then he'll crack a joke. He'll be like, well, if that's not going to be enough, you know what I mean? That kind of shit, that kind of hacky ass Drew McIntyre delivery. Nobody wants to see that shit anymore. It's done, you know? Let's be real. Drew McIntyre as a champion wasn't very good. You know, Drew McIntyre is cool. I like Drew McIntyre, but his wrestling is boring, right? His promos are boring. And what the fuck has he added to being champion? What has he done? What has he added to being champion? And for a long time, people may have been okay with it because they thought, oh, there's no one better right now. But Lashley's better, and we all know it, motherfucks. So, as far as the follow-through goes, in my humble opinion, Bobby Lashley should wrestle Drew McIntyre now at WrestleMania. I still would have said Drew versus Sheamus would have been better and have Lashley versus someone cool. Like if somehow they could call Brock Lesnar and say, Brock Lesnar, you versus Lashley, WrestleMania. That is a real WrestleMania dream match. Or Batista, you and Lashley. That is a real dream match. Hell, even Lashley, you and Cena. That is a dream match. You know what I mean? That's what I want to see. I don't want to see these stupid ass matches. Oh, Cena versus Bray Wyatt. oh, Randy Orton's possessed again. And get the fuck out of here with that horseshit, right? If they can do that, then do that, right? And then you can put Drew McIntyre with Sheamus for like some irrelevant bullshit, you know? But if you're going to do what it seems like they're going to do at this point, which is Drew versus Lashley, the correct way to end this match is to have a good, competitive 20-minute match that ends with Drew McIntyre going for the Claymore after he escapes the Hurt Lock, missing, and then getting speared by Lashley and getting beaten by Lashley. That would make a great co-main event, right? Like, not co-main event as in the second to last match, but you put this somewhere like 60% into the card, right? You know, 6% into the card, then you have like a women's match or some other horseshit, and then you have the real main event, which obviously is going to have to be Edge versus Roman Reigns, because Edge is still more interesting than Lashley, and definitely more interesting than Drew McIntyre, right? So there you go. That's what should happen. You know what I mean? I have a feeling that they might decide to give it to Drew, which I believe is really stupid, because not only has Drew already been champion for essentially a year, but it hasn't really worked out well. So in my opinion, this is Lashley's time. It would have been better if Lashley won the title at WrestleMania, but because he's a heel, I understand. So there you go, motherfuckers. The follow-through is just as important. If Lashley has one of these like 1 month title reigns, he may as well not have had it, you know? So there you go. I'm hoping Lashley wins at Mania, and the era of Lashley begins. Lashley is fucking awesome, motherfuckers.